As a kid, when the only jobs you knew were like doctor, lawyer, teacher, I feel like banking, consulting, software engineering, product, maybe venture, maybe founder is like kind of the college equivalent, at least in the social circles I ran in. All of that is to say, you don't have to do any of these jobs. But if you are thinking among them, then here's how I made that decision. To an extent, I tried to make this objective in the sense that anecdotally, I talk about the pay, the work hours, the culture, but obviously, this is actually extremely objective because this was the best choice for me. Now, I want to start with banking consulting because I was like straight up no to those, and then we're going to go through PM, suite, founder, and venture, which were other things that I think a lot of people consider. Starting with banking, which is the one I ruled out first, but we're going to kind of objectively cover things I know from friends who work in banking. So when it comes to hours, banking probably has the worst hours of this list. It's notorious that like Goldman Sachs bankers, first year analysts work like 95 hours on average, which if you do the math out is more than 16 hours a day if you were working 6 days a week. So you have pretty intense hours, you frequently work weekends. That is probably the number one con when it comes to like heavy finance stuff. When it comes to pay, obviously all this stuff depends on various firms that you're in and various positions that you're in. But if you look at like a Goldman Sachs first year analyst, which I assume is a pretty high end of the bar, they make $110,000 a year, and that does not include a signing as well as like potential end of year bonus. One thing to know about bonuses is that they're actually not tax advantaged very well. You get taxed very heavily on them. But anyways, yeah, so that's a lot of money, but you'll actually find it's not as much money as a lot of the other things on the list. When it comes to exit options, I actually hate that term. That term means like what I can do after I have this job. The reason why I don't like it is because really risk-averse people care about exit options because they think of their life as a path that other people give them. But I want to empower you to like take your own path. But anyways, when it comes to exit options from banking, people often go into private equity, they go into hedge funds, they go into strategy at a variety of operational companies, they might go into venture. So essentially, if you want to do anything financy across the board, like starting off in banking is awesome training. Okay, in this section, we're talking about culture and quirks of that job. I'm going to look down a little bit because I have a lot of notes, but anyways, the first thing is training in banking is really good. As in, you'll spend the first few months, like weeks for sure, and then months, like with all likelihood, just practicing and learning and getting reps in hard skills. So you will gain hard skills in modeling, hard skills in using Excel that you can take with you to any future opportunities. Also, I find that banking programs often come in a class, as in like you could be the class of 2010 that all come into banking together in this one company, and as a result, a lot of people make friends through those programs. Some other cultural quirks. You'll note that banking was one of the first industries to get people back in the office, and apparently some of them are really trying to like track people's swipes and stuff, so you will probably need to be in the office if your firm really wants you to be in the office. I think in most positions you are not going to have a huge amount of travel because you'll be doing work behind the scenes more so than talking to clients. Also, banking is very hierarchical. You have a position, you move up that position. I think that might sound like a con, but there are also a lot of pros to that in that people give you structures and rewards that you can look forward to, which you'll find that as an adult is extremely rare and super existentially scary. So if you like, people giving you milestones and then you being able to accomplish those milestones, banking is something that does offer that. And then finally, I would say you can find banking or finance jobs like all throughout the city and the world, but the mecca, at least in the US, is of course New York. Now on to consulting. First, when it comes to hours, again, all of this depends on the firm and whatever, but I'm basing it off of like the big banking firms or the big consulting firms. So when it comes to the big consulting firms, it is not unusual for people to be working evenings and also not unusual to be working some weekends. So probably less hours than like super intense finance banking, but probably still like 60 to 70 hours. So that's still like 12 to 14 hours, 5 to 6 days a week. I think something to note too about consulting, when I was a freshman and I wanted to do consulting, I was like, wow, traveling, the points, seeing the world. There are like quirks to that though, especially when it comes to work hours. Now, as a working adult, I realize that whenever I'm doing stuff on company time, even if that's traveling on company time, I consider that work. So that's something to keep in mind. When it comes to pay, of course, again, totally depends on where you go, but I'm benchmarking based on like the top firms. So if you look at McKinsey, they pay their first year analysts somewhere between $90,000 and $110,000 a year. $110,000, yes, a year. That does not include signing bonuses or other bonuses that they may provide. When it comes to exit options, again, I hate this term, but this category is actually often for risk-averse people, so you probably care about this. When it comes to exit options, one thing that someone once told me about consulting, which I think is funny but kind of true, and I think it's true about venture too, is like you don't learn a lot of skills in that you don't learn a lot of hard skills. It's hard to put on a resume like I can program in this language or I know this Excel thing. That's not really something that's not something people frequently get in consulting. But that doesn't mean you don't have amazing exit options. A lot of people go to business school, they go into venture, they go into industry. Whatever you are working on, you might end up in that industry, whether that's chemicals, whether that's startups, whether that's hardware, whatever. So I think you really learn how to think very well, and that can take you in many different directions. Okay, so onto the culture/quirk section of consulting. Now, first, again, you are often with a class of people, so you might make friends from that class. Probably the most canonical thing that people know about consulting is that you get to travel a lot, which is awesome. You get to see different places, and you get to do it on company's dime, and you get to stay in fancy hotels, and you get the points, which is awesome. There is a flip side to this, of course, which is that you're spending a lot of time away from your home. So if you leave Monday morning and you come back Thursday night, that's not a lot of time in the apartment that you build and that you're paying rent for. So I think people do get sick of this over time, or maybe you won't. Also, you don't get to choose where you go. Important to note that. You also don't get to choose what projects you're on. So, depending on the project, it might suit your interest more or less. Like banking, consulting is quite hierarchical in nature. That's how the teams are set up, with various people across various hierarchies. This is good because you get to have milestones and you get to learn from people above you, but bad if you're someone who doesn't like a hierarchical, job like that. And then again, in terms of where in the world they might be located, lots and lots of cities, major cities, will have consulting companies and offices that you can work from. Let me give you my pitch on why I think we are still in the golden ages of tech. Now, some things to know. One, society, in terms of what it values, is usually 10 years behind in terms of what's actually going on if you're on the forefront of an industry. And there are eras in which certain fields are really popular, right? There's an era of advertising really being the hot stuff, or there's an era of finance, or there's an era of consulting. I think we are squarely in the era of tech, and tech is going to continue to be that for a very long time. There may very well be a day where we talk about having a tech job as sillily as if we were to say we have a job in electricity, but as the world transforms into a tech-based world, I think it is really one of the most exciting fields to be in. Obviously, I'm heavily biased working in venture, but that's my pitch. Okay, so now getting into the stuff that I was more likely to do, which is we're going to talk about product management and software engineering, particularly at big tech. I want to emphasize this because there are a lot of tech companies, but I'm talking about the big tech companies from a culture perspective. Now, when it comes to hours, really depends on your team, really depends on the company. Apple's notorious for working people really hard. Some companies are not notorious for working people super hard. But I would say as a whole, people in big tech work less hours than you would in finance, consulting, or some of these other fields. So maybe you work a 40-hour work week, maybe even some weeks you work less than a 40-hour work week, and maybe working weekends is not super uncommon. I don't think we should say this shamefully. I think more jobs should be like this. When it comes to pay, obviously, again, it depends, but I was looking at Google entry-level software engineers, or PMs, and they seem, according to the internet, to make between $130,000 to $140,000 a year. On top of, I know that they also make $80K in stock options, which renew. Stock options are getting the option to buy or to have those. You get the company stock, and that's actually better for taxes for a variety of reasons than bonuses. So in other words, you do get paid really, really quite well in big tech. When it comes to exit options, I don't think people in tech think that much about exit options, but what I do observe is that people in tech tend to stay within the tech or startup ecosystem. So for example, they might go between various tech companies, whether that's on the big side or whether that's on the small side. They might become startup founders, but they tend to work in like tech as a whole. Now, going on to talking about the culture and quirks of big tech in particular. So you may or may not have a class of people. So for example, like the APM programs tend to have a class of people that you become friends with. If you are just a random entry-level software engineer at one big company, you might have less of that camaraderie, but I do tend to find that like they do tend to find friends with each other. You likely will not be traveling a ton in your role because again, you're more working on getting the product to market. You're not doing like a lot of client facing stuff. I think one thing that's really important about like this structure versus, for example, consulting, which is something I did not understand when I was in school, is there's a difference between a partnership model and a team model. Consulting is a partnership model. If you are working on a product at Google, that is a team model, and I think there are a lot of advantages depending on who you are to seeing what like a really competent team that has to work together in order to succeed looks like, as opposed to individuals being really successful and being able to carry the relationship with the client and be like successful in that field that way. For big tech, it's still hierarchical, like the same way that consulting and banking is. In fact, it's potentially more so because they have like a lot of levels. They have a lot of nuance to those levels, which again is good or bad. Good in the sense that you get milestones and you feel like you're improving, maybe bad in the sense that these are actually really arbitrary human milestones that are made to make us feel better. So also in terms of like hybrid versus in-person work, depends a lot on the company, but I think hybrid is really becoming the standard within most big tech companies, so you'll probably have a decent amount of flexibility as it pertains to going to the office. Okay, now we're talking about being founder. This is kind of a wild card because like not that many college students leave college and become a full-time founder, but some do. And here's what it would look like. So in terms of hours, most founders I know, particularly for the first 2 years, work all the time because they have to, because absolutely everything, the survival of your company, your career, your employees' pay, rests on your shoulders. So you will work as much as it takes to maintain your sanity, but also push the company forward. When it comes to pay, you will probably have the lowest pay of everyone on the list in terms of liquid assets, meaning like the cash that you get per year is probably not a whole lot, like maybe like 90K in the first year or so, but technically on paper you're super rich because the equity you have in your company is probably in the millions, if not tens of millions, but you don't get to access it unless there's an exit in the future, which takes time. In terms of exit options, I hate this idea, like I said, and I actually hate this more in founding than I think anywhere else, because you should start a company to believe that you're going to run it for a really long time. But what you do find is that startup founders who leave the company that they're working on tend to start within the startup ecosystem, and they can do lots of other things. They can do venture, they can go back to being an employee or like a software engineer, or they can co-found. More often than not, this is what they do. They start another company, tends to be like a revolving door within the startup ecosystem. Okay, in terms of culture / quirks of being a founder as a job. So the first is that you are working for yourself and your dreams, this is the only job in which you are doing that. For everyone else, you are building someone else's dream, but for this, you are building your own. However, as a result of that, you cannot take absolutely anything for granted because there's no infrastructure built out in the company when you started, and everything rests on your shoulders. Also, I do find that this is probably one of the more lonely jobs unless you really actively try and combat that, because it's really you and your co-founder, if that, against the world. There's lots of things that a lot of people around you will not understand. You are primarily working with yourself, so that's something to note. Also, I do want to emphasize that being a founder, like because I work with a lot of founders, is really not glamorous most of the time. Like we as a society have really been made founder and being an entrepreneur seem like it's just like talking on podcasts. It's actually really painful and hard work most of the time. If you do it right out of the college, one thing that you gain is obviously this insane growth opportunity to lead a team in a way that you would not get in pretty much in any other role. The con of this is that you don't get to see what a really competent team looks like, and you don't get to learn from that prior to starting your own company. I will kind of, say that like, I think one of the cool things about being a founder is it's one of the only jobs on this list where it's very hard to be complacent, because if you're a complacent founder, you're probably going to not make it. But you can get really complacent in all the other jobs because you work and you make a lot of money for people in your age group particularly, and so you might end up staying there out of comfort rather than because it's what you're really passionate about. Okay, so now we're going to talk about venture. Now, note your life in venture will be very different if you're early stage versus growth stage. If you're growth stage, I would say it looks a lot closer to the banking route. So I'm going to primarily talk about early stage venture because that's what I do. So when it comes to hours, again, growth looks a little bit more like banking, definitely better, but a little bit more like banking. Early stage ventures, you have hours that you get to choose, but I would say they range between like 40, which is normal, to like 70, which is like a lot. One thing to note is that if you're an early stage venture, you often do a lot of very social things. At first, when I started my job, I was like, this is fun. And now I'm like, actually, this is fun, but this is work, and I include it in my hours. When it comes to pay, totally depends, of course, on which firm you're at and, other things about the market. But I would say, like, in a lot of the people I know, they get paid similar to if you were to have done a straight out of undergrad tech job. Now, no, instead of stock options, you usually get, hopefully, eventually, carry in the funds, which means you essentially have like equity in the venture funds. In terms of exit options, actually kind of like consulting, like I said, I think a lot of venture people don't gain, especially early stage venture people, don't gain hard skills. It's not like you're coding or it's not like you're doing Excel spreadsheets. You gain a lot of knowledge and a lot of soft skills. But as a result, I find that there's like, certain things that you can do. Like you can do anything, but like people often start their own company, they stay within venture, maybe they move into different parts of venture or different parts of finance or different parts of operating. That one's kind of common, where you become like a COO of a company, or you become a chief of staff, or you become a BD, or you go into the startup world that way. But I do find that venture people tend to stay within the startup ecosystem as opposed to moving to even like big tech, for example. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the culture and quirks of venture, which I can talk the most to because this is what I actually do. So first, I think you hands down get the best network of any job in this list, because on a day-to-day basis, in fact, on an hour-to-hour basis, you are meeting people who are top of their field, who are so passionate about what they do across so many industries. This leads to my second point, which is I think if you're a very curious mind and you just want to like learn a lot of stuff, venture is so much fun because every hour you get to learn about different things. This is something people say about consulting often, but I think the cycle is even shorter in venture. Like in consulting, let's say you meet a new type of company for 3 months. Well, in venture, you meet a new type of company maybe every half hour. Now, that brings us to the first trade-off, which is venture is very much about breadth, not depth. Almost all of these other jobs, you get serious depth. Like if you're a PM on Sony's camera lens, blah, 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 you will understand the product so well. Venture, you understand a broad variety of things at a much more shallow level, but like, hopefully you still know a lot and learn a lot. One thing that's really cool, like founding, it's not founding, but like founding, it is quite self-directed, at least what I found, as in people as a culture are very open to you paving your own way, into you chasing things that you care about, scheduling your day, etc. This is very different from consulting and finance in particular, but also potentially different from tech. I think you really do have a lot of freedom, for better or for worse. Some things on the not for worse side, but to note for myself, like that I learned, is that it is a partnership model, like consulting, as in it's a lot of individuals coming together to form a partnership, as opposed to people building up teams to build a big company. That has a lot of implications for whether people want to be team builders, are good at being team builders, whether you will ever learn how to build a team in venture. Probably not, in most cases. And finally, there's a very long feedback cycle in venture because your investments don't pan out, at least at the early stage, until like a decade later. And you don't really know until like a few years later if they were any good at all. So that is something to consider. Okay, so after all of this, why did I actually choose venture? Now, funny story, after I got the offer for the VC firm I'm currently at, I went to them to tell them no, because I was going to take a PMing job instead, but they were awesome salespeople and they convinced me otherwise. So that's actually how I ended up in venture. But knowing what I know now, like why I would pick venture again over and over for me personally is, let me look at my list. First, I think in terms of network and in terms of just the sheer breadth of things you get to learn, it is unparalleled of an opportunity. I actually really like personally being high level, or not high level, but having more breadth across many subjects as opposed to depth, just kind of where I am in my life. That's a better thing for me. I really, really like that there was a lot of accountability and responsibility in venture. Accountability, as in you can't hide behind a company that turns out billions of dollars. Like, you are very accountable for your own career and your own deals. And then when it comes to responsibility, you have a lot of freedom, or at least I have a lot of freedom to chase the things that matter to me. And I've kind of learned as an adult that I really don't like being told what to do. Turns out, in a lot of situations. You do have better hours, I would say, as a whole than finance and even consulting. If you include consulting's travel time, actually maybe just consulting generally, you do tend to have worse hours than big tech, for sure. And also, you do have very good financial upside. Like, you get treated and you get paid really well, but you also have more upside potential because you're not just being paid a salary. You get carried, hopefully, in deals that you've brought in. So there's like a very strong mapping of what you've done to the outcomes that you see over time. But that's just those are just some of the reasons why I'm really happy with the decision I made. But these are not the reasons that you should make your decision, because it is really, really up to you. And there is such thing as fit. My gosh, when I was a college student looking for a job, looking for any job, I didn't really believe in fit. I now do believe in fit. And I hope that this was useful in some way. If you have any questions or other thoughts, I don't know, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think. See you in my next video.